Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Gulsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Can you repeat that rant that you just went on?
No, I'm not going to repeat it.
I wanted all of our listeners to know the right way to hunt a turkey.
No. Well,
and by that I should say, I need to clarify. Marcus was not sharing a story about violating any kind of regulations or doing anything unethical. We had just finished up, just sharing our personal opinions on hunting approaches, let's just say.
Well, and I think you should provide some other context. We commonly bounce results off of each other to kind of get a reaction to see, like, hey, what do you think about these results? And I had shown you some from we're working on a relative density estimation of turkeys range-wide, and I showed you some of the results that'll be coming soon. So hopefully I'll be able to make that public soon.
Yeah, when that map comes, our listeners are going to eat that map alive. I mean, they're not. I shouldn't have said eat it alive. They're going to eat it up. They're going to love it.
Oh yeah, and that I'm trying to get a few eyes on it to see if it makes sense. But then Will, you shared some data that you were trying to get my opinion on, and it led us down this path where we then, kind of gave some opinions on how we think we should deal with things. So I don't want to put anybody on the edge of their seat, but we got some cool stuff coming.
Yeah, that's right.
So
getting back to the kind of the topic at hand and what we're going to talk about today, we kicked around several ideas, and I think where we landed was that it's going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge. You agree? There's a few different topics we thought y'all would want to hear about, but we've also been getting a lot of positive listener feedback that they enjoy some of these episodes that I guess maybe you could call them a little bit more laid back, not as technical.
Yeah, maybe a little more philosophical and thought-provoking and a little less technical. And
yeah. I mean, we just don't have a lot of time to back and forth and share opinions when we have a guest on and we're trying to deep dive on a technical issue.
Yeah,
so these episodes,
when we have some new data, or we're doing a deep dive on the literature, it's harder to, you
don't have a lot of space.
Yeah. That more flexible conversation.
Right. So, one of those first topics that you came up with to lead with is being technique-driven versus outcome-driven in turkey management.
Yeah, I think we touched on that a little bit in the last episode, but I was telling you what brought that to my attention. I've been thinking about how I teach habitat management, and it just kind of hit me. We tend to have this focus on techniques, like evaluating techniques.
Yeah, like everybody wants to know when to burn, how to burn, how often to burn,
right?
How to spray, when to spray, what to spray, yeah, all that stuff.
Which herbicide is good or bad, like
where to cut trees, how many trees to cut.
And then we always say it depends, and that's because it's depending on outcome. What is the desirable outcome, and then how do you achieve it in different situations? Yeah. And it just kind of struck me as an interesting way to think about that from a more of a philosophical standpoint. It's like we're evaluating those techniques instead of evaluating outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality of the situation, and I think that's what's, at least the feedback that I got, people really appreciated us providing some of that context and taking a step back and saying, listen, like, there's a lot of ways to do this, and there's not a one approach that's going to be effective everywhere, right? You can apply fire, but the context you're in might result in a different outcome. Really, where I guess I kind of started thinking we should try to focus efforts on learning on how to evaluate outcomes. Just, I think it's valuable for us to just reflect on things like that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not that this practice is good and that practice is bad. It's this outcome is what we're trying to achieve. And did we achieve it or not? And if not, is there another strategy that we could take, whether it be altering the use of the tool, the same tool, or changing tools or changing areas, it's really about developing knowledge on how to evaluate the outcome.
Right.
So did you create high quality brooding cover? Do you have the correct composition of plants and structure that you're trying to accomplish? And the knowledge focus, in terms of learning, should be, I think it would be better served, I guess, if we focused on that outcome and being able to evaluate the outcome.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the other thing that people should be thinking of, and many of them do, because I get questions about this, but maybe I keep getting them because we still don't really have a good answer. But they always ask, how much of that do I need? And that,
Yeah.
like I said, is the harder question to answer.
Well, I think that, we're kind of taking a step back now, right? And
Yeah.
thinking, wait a minute, where should we allocate resources? Part of that is thinking about what should we be evaluating in terms of the outcomes. But yeah, you're right. Like, it's hard to know how much you need of something because it's dependent on other things.
And yeah, and that's my point is I think you need to know what your goal is for how much of it you want. And instead of, staying so abstract, let's just use an example like brooding cover, right?
Right.
Like what percentage of my property needs to be in brooding cover? That can help you prioritize and efficiently allocate your time. If,
Then
right? Because if you determine you have enough of it, then you move on to something else. But if not, that's what you focus on. You need to
yeah,
do the same thing with year-round forage and cover needs, right?
yeah. I think another
Make sure
problem
it's
of
present in every season.
taking a step back is, okay, you've got 200 acres. Well, maybe brooding cover is limited on your property, but maybe the entire landscape is full of it.
Yeah.
It may not be as much of a priority in that circumstance. I think that's probably rare, given you and I and several others that we've talked to, and the research, data-driven inference from multiple studies suggests that poult rearing cover is probably very limited on the landscape in most contexts.
Yeah, and the smaller the property that I have, the more I'm going to prioritize attraction over year-round needs. And because early succession is so limiting on the landscape and because turkeys are so drawn to it during hunting season, I might, if I have a smaller property, as that property scale goes down, I might place greater emphasis on providing early successional cover so that I have the greatest probability of bringing turkeys to my property during the hunting
So
season.
you might be influencing productivity to some degree, but your objective is more about attraction. And you may want to cut this out, and we can do that if you want to. But what does your data on gobbling show from your current study? That was, if I
Yeah,
recall, the most
it showed
important
that
factor.
yeah, it showed gobbling increased, all the way up to 25% early successional cover at the property scale.
Yeah, and then maybe I'm misremembering this, but wasn't that the most important factor
Yeah.
affecting gobbling?
Yeah, the property, so we had I think it was a total of 11 properties in the study, and the one with the most gobbling had the most early succession,
And the one with the least
percentage
gobbling,
wise.
the
Percentage
one,
wise.
yeah, and the one with the least gobbling had the least.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, and then you found a significant relationship with as you increase early succession, you increase gobbling, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good example right there. We talk about early succession regularly because of poult rearing, but maybe you just want, maybe you just want to hear more gobbling, and you may not have control of enough acreage to really influence productivity, but doesn't mean that you can't still influence attractiveness.
You know what I love about that situation, though, is that it's a win-win in the sense that you're satisfying your own selfish motives of having more
Yeah,
turkeys to potentially harvest in the spring, but you're also providing a limited resource across the landscape, and you're turning
yeah,
your property into a turkey factory.
yeah. I think that's a good point, and I tend to like that as well because it gets people, regardless of their motive, to do it.
hmm But
Right?
you flip the script, right? Because most people you talk to will tell you that they see turkeys all the time during deer season, but not during turkey season. And that's because they have fall winter habitat, not spring summer habitat.
Yeah,
So this is what we're talking about is flipping the script.
yeah. So you could influence attractiveness by improving poult rearing cover or providing more of it.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this to some degree. It's often a barrier to get people to do it that they don't think they have a large enough footprint to make an impact.
Yeah.
So maybe that's true, but if everybody has that selfish motive that we're going to make early succession to have more attractiveness during the season on my land, and everybody has 100 acres, well, you're then starting to make a big impact
hmm
collectively if even though it's driven by selfish motive in that
Yeah.
point. And I'm not saying selfish in a negative connotation. I'm just it's about your experience instead of about the bird necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't mean that to be negative.
Yeah.
Like, I like to have turkeys attracted to my place just like everybody
But
else.
that's why I think it's a beautiful thing, in contrast, you could contrast this or juxtapose it, I guess, against somebody that's trying to bait the turkeys onto their property during
I
turkey
was just
season.
thinking, now it's
That
completely,
that's the selfish way to do it.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's the same motive, but you don't get the same outcome, right?
Right.
In the early succession, not only are you making it more attractive, you're also enhancing productivity.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be like a fun little I mean, we neither of us would ever do this because it would be such a waste. Oh, not a waste. It wouldn't be a waste of time, but it would not be an efficient use of our time. But wouldn't it be really interesting though to take two what we would consider pretty poor quality turkey properties and then just bait one and see how many turkeys we get on camera in there during turkey season, and then actually go in and do habitat improvements on the other and see how many we get in there.
That
I
would
don't
be
know.
cool.
It'd just be fun to do stuff like that. But
I wish
um,
we could. I wish we could just
yeah.
intelligently tinker.
But we really need to be focused more so on, limiting factors at the population scale.
Well, maybe that's another approach to we could start thinking about, well, what are ways that we can solve both objectives
Yeah.
simultaneously, like make your property more attractive by making it more productive.
And I think the first argument you're likely to hear if you propose that to people is that they may not be able to create early succession where they hunt, right? And that's difficult. I mean, like, what are you going to do? We've talked about, maybe some places that you could do it.
Maybe you alter your food plot plan
Yeah.
so that it better accomplishes
Yeah,
both.
we've talked about some strategies if you want to go back and listen to those episodes, so we don't necessarily need to rehash that now. Um, but the other thing I feel like the other barrier to entry for people to create more early succession is they don't feel like they have enough acreage to, attract a commercial timber harvest, or they don't have large equipment or anything like that to do it with. But that is, we've talked about several techniques on this show before too. That doesn't necessarily have to be a barrier either. There's things that you can use like herbicide injection with FSI to create it very cheaply. And in fact, that would be an interesting component to add to that little hypothetical study we were joking about a second ago. Is let's compare the expense that you would have to, the cost per turkey attracted to the property with corn versus with the early succession you created, And I think it
I
could
love
still
that corn
it's
has to come into every
still
single
be cheap.
episode.
You know what? You're the second person that said that to me today.
Somebody else told you they love that happens?
I brought up corn with Ted DeVos earlier today. And they said the same exact thing. It always gets back to corn with you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good segue to talk about my new project.
Yeah. Well, we have some things on the horizon that are going to be exciting.
Yeah.
So, well, I know, I don't know if you liked the idea, but we've talked a lot about data gaps, and you and I both have gotten, some various sources of funding to address some of those. I didn't know if you want to get into some of that.
Yeah, so the one that I was just teasing about a little bit, and that can help us address a big data gap. Y'all are, drum roll please, right? Y'all are all going to be so surprised. I'm doing a wildlife feeding study, and so the gist of it is, I'm frustrated by not having the direct data to speak specifically to how feeding corn potentially changes the predator-prey dynamic on a property where turkeys are an objective, right? I want that data set. And so I'm going after it in this project. I just got news. The Alabama Wildlife Federation, Turkeys for Tomorrow, and the Alabama chapter of the NWTF couldn't be more appreciative to all three of those organizations for letting me know this week that they are going to fund the work. And we're going to compare raccoon and possum densities on fed and unfed sites. We're actually going to manipulate the density of feeders on the site. So we're going to have some areas with more and some areas with fewer. We're going to also manipulate when the feeders are feeding. So we're going to have some sites that are going to be fed year round. And in that case, that's kind of trying to look for, like what is the potential maximum influence that feeding can have on turkey nest predators. And then we'll have some areas that are just set up to feed during deer season, like a lot of people are doing right now. So that's, relevant real world stuff.
Well, I think that's one thing that comes up a lot from people that engage me on this issue is, well, I understand how that could be problematic to feed all year, but what if I just do it during deer season while I
That's right.
And is that going to be all corn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I put that in the study, is because so many people feed that way. So I wanted to have information on how that, what that practice does to predator communities or not, right?
Yeah. One thing I really love about that is it seems like, and we've talked about this before, the focus, like if you talk about feeding being an issue with turkeys, immediately the only issue that seems to be important to anybody or brought up is aflatoxin.
Yeah.
It's like that's the only possible problem.
Right.
So this is another one that we have talked about at great length, and I think I'm glad you got the funding to address it directly.
Yeah. So on all of those sites, and across all that wide range of conditions that we'll be evaluating, we'll be looking at differences in survival of the predators, differences in reproduction, differences in population growth rates, abundance, areas of use. So does feeding cause them to spend more time in where areas are more likely to turkeys are more likely to nest, for example? So we're trying to look at the